Hey guys, welcome to another episode of the World Football Summit podcast. I'm your host, Jaime, CMO at World Football Summit. Ever since Football Innovation Forum, I have been intrigued by a comment that Fred Antunes, founder at Real Fever, said, in which he urged commercial and legal teams to actually start working together very strongly if they are to succeed in Web3. Precisely, with everything that's going on around the space, new ways to monetize from fans emerge, whether it's through merchandise, sponsorship, or even media rights. This is why I was very much looking forward to having this conversation with today's guest, Etienne Sanz de Acedo, CEO at the International Trademark Association. In this enlightening conversation, he explains to us how intellectual property is going to evolve in Web3 and how the International Trademark Association, or INTA, is helping brands around the world and across all industries to adapt to this new playing field. We also touch upon some of the most relevant topics from an IP perspective, such as counterfeit merchandise items, piracy, broadcasting, and what the future of IP may look like. Now, I am not an expert on the topic whatsoever, so for me, this was a true masterclass that we hope you enjoy as much as we did. And Etienne is actually a confirmed speaker for WFS Europe in Sevilla on September 28th and 29th, so you will be able to learn much more from him during the event. It's just a few days away. And IP is definitely one of the topics of the future. So head over to our website if you haven't done so already and make sure you purchase your ticket. Finally, please feel free to leave your feedback across social media. You know where to reach us: LinkedIn, Twitter, Instagram, Facebook. It helps us understand if you get value out of these conversations. Nothing else from my side. I hope you get to enjoy the conversation with Etienne Sanz de Acedo. Etienne, thank you very much for joining us today. This is going to be it's a conversation that I really look forward to, because I feel like IP is something that's getting a protagonist role, not only in the sports industry, but in the world in general. No? So it feels like a great time to bring you on. So thank you for joining us.
Well, thank you very much, Jaime, for having me and having us. It's a real pleasure.
So I want to start this conversation just to let the audience know we're going to focus on IP from, let's say, the football perspective and the general sports industry perspective, and we're going to touch upon different topics. But in general terms, I want to start off with a basic question: is what do you believe football clubs need to understand better in the realm of IP? What are they missing?
Well, I mean, that's a big question. What I would say is I don't think, football clubs and corporations in general are paying sufficient attention to intellectual property and industrial property. And there is a huge potential in, the value as an intangible asset. And I think, clubs should pay more attention to it, because there is a lot of, revenue that they're not making and they're not grabbing because of that.
Okay, fantastic. And the thing is, when I was preparing for the interview, it kind of came to my mind that usually when people think of IP, or they generally consider or something that's more visual, no? When they think of a brand. But I think there are other elements, like I'm thinking about, in the particular case of sport, about sound. No, there are unique sounds that characterize a team, a league, even. No, so what other elements are being overlooked from an IP perspective that need to be protected?
Well, I think there are many of them. You have, of course, trademarks. You have the brands themselves, you have the design, you have the domain names, you have, all kind of IP rights, copyrights. But, I'll give you a concrete example. When we talk about, the brand, the trademark, it can be the name of a football club, it can be the logo, it can be a kind of 3D mark, which might be the stadium. It might be some merchandising that is being developed. All that is protectable and enforceable. Then you have, for example, when you have some key players, the gestures of those key players, they could be protected as well. So there is a huge potential, a huge array of, of rights that should be kind of, strategized, protected, enforced. And where there is a potential to, make money out of that. This is what, football clubs need to understand. The same way you professionalize your finance, your marketing areas, you need to do the same with intellectual property. And even more so nowadays where, everybody's online and, the sports industry, the gaming industry is changing.
Actually, I couldn't agree more. It's changing, and it actually leads perfectly well into my next question. And I think one of the hot topics in terms of IP is broadcasting and OTTs, no? And there's a clear move, or there's a clear trend around those two concepts, no? And I recently heard an interview with Dan Porter from Overtime. I guess you might know the case from the United States, no? And basically, he started as a digital content platform, but he's evolved in business to actually have his own league, because his reasoning was, if I want to stand out, I need in the future, I need to own the IP, not just distribute it. You also see a lot of teams going the other way, saying, I need to create my own OTT because I need to get direct access to fans. So do you see that being a trend that's going to be actually a deep reality in the industry?
Yes and no. As a football fan or a soccer fan for the Americans, I would like to keep it, the way it has been so far. But at the same time, when we see, all the changes that are happening in society, I think it's absolutely inevitable. And are we going to see, different leagues? And are we going to see broadcasters really owning the leagues and managing the leagues? Yeah, that could definitely happen. I mean, we know that fans nowadays, they're not necessarily following teams anymore. They're following players. They don't want a 90 minutes game. They want to just see, the main, goals, strikes from their key players. That is changing. So, we need to think about that as well.
Fully agree, and that actually ties well with a question that I wanted to ask, but since you brought it up, I fully agree. Right now we're shifting, and there's more focus on the players. And if you think about it, there are some players that are actually, from a brand perspective, they're even more important than the teams they play for. So you see, Cristiano Ronaldo was a clear case. No, he moved over to Juventus, and then a lot of followers actually went from following Madrid to following Juventus. No, but do you think, from a player standpoint, are they doing a good job in protecting their personal brand?
Some do that better than others. I think, some are definitely not doing a good job. And they're just not doing a good job, out of ignorance of the potential of, protecting rightly, the rights and really identifying what can be protected, what can be enforced, and what can be monetized in a good way. And as I said, some are able to do that better than others, but it's the same as with football clubs. If you ask me what is the percentage of football clubs that are, well managed from an IP perspective, well, Jaime, I will have to tell you, it's really a minority of them. And this is where, when you look at a value chain within a company, you pay a lot of attention to some of your intangible assets, but you have a huge one that has been ignored for far too much time. That's what we need to change. And we need to change it because now it's not anymore, just going to a stadium or watching a game on TV. It's of course, it's internet, it's, social media, it's, new technologies, metaverses, etc. What's going to happen there? How do you protect yourself in the metaverse?
Definitely. And we're going to go into a few questions on Web3 because obviously that's kind of like the hot topic of today. But I guess I can't let this conversation go without asking about two also other hot topics that impact the industry. First off, copyright infringement and especially piracy. That's always been at the top of the list and top of the concerns for sport properties in any sport, not only football and worldwide. But do you feel, or how do you feel that has evolved over the recent years? Are they doing a better job, football properties today and sports properties in general, in protecting themselves?
I think they are. That's probably an area where there's been definitely improvement, on the side of football clubs, on the side of the major leagues. And I'm not talking about the US major leagues. I'm talking about, La Liga, and the equivalent here in Europe. I think they've understood the potential of, copyright. And also what has somehow changed is that, from that perspective, our policymakers have somehow understood a little better, how damaging that could be. And they've probably understood that better than in other industry sectors because, normally IP is not particularly popular. The reason why they might have understood it better is because, as we say, football moves masses. El fútbol mueve masas. And that means that our politicians, when you talk about, hey, wait a minute, it's, there is copyright here. This is what's happening. There is piracy. They've been able to pay more attention to that than in other industry sectors. From that perspective, I think definitely there's been improvement. Still a lot to go, though.
I'm thinking about another, let's say, hot topic, which is actually has to do with merchandising, which has been traditionally another source of concern for sport leaders, especially with regards to counterfeit items. And it was actually last week, I think, or a couple of weeks ago, that La Liga Tech announced a partnership with La Liga from Portugal, where they're going to support them, actually monitor and identify counterfeit merchandise items. So would you argue, though, because there's so much going on, but would you argue, though, that's one of the sources, or if not the biggest source of concerns for football properties?
Well, I think, there are several. One is definitely, piracy when it comes to, copyright content. There's no doubt about that. The other one is counterfeiting of the merchandising. There's no doubt about that. And let's not forget that, counterfeits, in this case, they might not affect health and safety, but they're definitely affecting, the business of the football clubs and the business of the providers of the football clubs that, sometimes are, the big corporations like, Nike, Adidas, etc. But sometimes they're more kind of small, medium-sized enterprises. Because when we talk about football, we're always thinking about, the top clubs, Primera División or, Premier League, etc. But, we know that there is a second, there is a third, there is a fourth division. And all those clubs need protection, need support.
There's so much out there in terms of the ecosystem. The football industry is built of those, let's say, more humble teams, right? Not only the top clubs, And in that sense, I think this segues nicely into the next topic, which I want to cover, which is Web3, And I think blockchain technology on that front, because of the capability it has to ensure, or to track the sources of each of the items. But there's so many other use cases. In the end of the day, blockchain is a transformative technology that can impact so many realms of the industry. I would assume if I had to put it into three buckets, the main benefits are going to be seen across merchandising, as we were talking about, ticket sales, because that's another issue, and also content rights. Is this correct, though? Am I seeing this correctly, or are there any other realms that are going to?
I think you're absolutely right. I mean, the first thing I would say, Jaime, there is not only one metaverse. There, a multiplicity of metaverses, and like we have with the web, where we have, the kind of, white web, the dark web, and gray webs. With metaverses in plural, we're going to have the same situation. Now, if you look at the positioning companies are taking on the metaverses in plural, I mean, it's more from a marketing communication perspective, and then it brings back to a more kind of traditional distribution mechanism. So yes, it has a potential, no doubt, in terms of, tickets. It has a potential in terms of merchandising, and then it has potential in terms of content. You can have the games being broadcasted there, but then we can talk about NFTs. And that's a huge new business. And that is, a huge potential for clubs. And that needs a strategy behind it. That needs IP professionals to understand how that works. So, my advice to, any football club is you need to have an in-house IP professional. And you need to make sure that that person is really, participating in the strategic development of the club, because there is a huge potential into it. Now, the last point I would like to make regarding that is when we talk about metaverses and we talk about blockchain, we will see that there will be domain names on the metaverse like we had that on internet. 30 years ago, there was huge, appropriation of rights, what we call cyber squatting. Well, this will happen with the metaverse exactly the same way. even more. It's going to be exponential. Again, you need someone to be able to understand that, anticipate that, strategize, and protect the assets of the different clubs.
I agree. I think at the end of the day, with all these new technologies, when you look into the core of it, usually you see similar patterns. Different technology, but the behaviors are more or less pretty much the same, no? And there was something interesting there, which is actually, I was going to ask you about it, but you gave me the answer already. During Football Innovation Forum, which was an event we held in Sevilla a couple of months ago, Fred Antunes, he's the CEO and founder at a company called Real Fever, and they work with NFTs and with football clubs. No? And one of the things he was mentioning in a panel where I actually moderated that discussion, which is why and ever since then, I wanted to get some clarification from an expert like yourself. No, he was saying that in the future, with all this metaverse rollout and all with NFTs, commercial and legal teams need to be like best friends because there's so much to understand. No, but going back to what you were mentioning with NFTs, and that's a whole another world. There's been a lot of controversy lately with counterfeit items also in NFTs. Not maybe particularly related to sports yet. So that's actually my question, because you've seen it with art. But do you think there's the same risk for sports?
I think it's exactly the same risk, if not even more, because sports tend to be more popular. But I mean, how can I say that? I wouldn't say that sport are an expression of art. But, there, for many people, there are this kind of thing, and people see art in, a strike from Cristiano Ronaldo or Lionel Messi. Now, if you can do that with pieces of art and or NFTs, you can definitely do that, with football players and knowing that there is even more demand for that nowadays. So,
definitely. And you were talking about Ronaldo and Messi, and the rivalry those two greats have had, no? And speaking of rivalry, also a few weeks ago, I don't know if it was last week or the week before that, but we saw Real Madrid and Barcelona. They actually filed a joint trademark for crypto and metaverse initiatives, actually protecting El Clásico as a rivalry, which is interesting. They're going to do a whole new business around that. No? So do you think that's the beginning of something, of a new trend, where actually teams that are traditionally rivals, and in some occasions they can't even, quote unquote, speak with each other, protect their rivalry? Is that something that you see happening?
I think it's a smart trend. It's probably a new trend. But let me tell you, it's not totally new. In other industry sectors, some of that is already happening. Of course, you have to be very careful from an antitrust, anti-competition perspective that, competitors cannot, share, relevant information or have some kind of joint projects. But, for example, within our association, within INTA, pharma industry, they meet, retail industry, they meet, food and beverage industry, they meet. Why? Because they all have the same kind of common problems. And they all have the same kind of interfaces with consumers, with our clients. That's exactly the same for football clubs. And what is really important is that, like, everything in football clubs that is becoming more professionalized, IP needs to be so as well. And if there is opportunity for partnerships, they should go for that. And yes, of course, yes, we have El Clásico Madrid-Barça. But, there is also El Clásico, Milan-Inter, or, Chelsea, Liverpool. Probably not called El Clásico, but they have their specific names. There's a potential there.
Yeah. Okay, and actually, thank you for that, because sometimes in the sports industry, we're kind of in the bubble of our own thing. And it also helps to understand that this is something that's being seen across many other industries. No, this is a new space for everyone. No, and that's impacting all across the industry. And what I want to cover now in this section of the conversation is how can the International Trademark Association help? Now, if I'm not mistaken, you carried out a study on the future of IP. So I don't know if you can give some kind of detail or a glimpse into what you have found out of what the future of IP looks like, and with a particular angle of the sports industry?
Yeah, well, I mean, we're still, this is an ongoing process. We looked at, what would be the future of IP offices when registering rights, the future of in-house departments within companies, and the future of, IP law firms. But we will be releasing this year a project, a report on the future of intellectual property or protection of intellectual property in the outer space. So in the moon and in Mars. Well,
Wow.
Imagine the first football club that will decide to organize some kind of promotional campaign, not to talk about a game on the moon. You need to start thinking about protecting that. That's the kind of thing that we're doing. But even, before going so far away, I think, the starting point is really to help football clubs understand the value of their intangible assets and the way they can monetize those assets. And there are many different ways. And then really helping them understand how they need to structure that internally. You can always rely on an external counsel, on a specialized law firm, but you will need someone within your staff who will be able to, define a strategy, interact with business, with, marketing, with sales, and really start, positioning the company in those new platforms, in those new markets that are developing. Because we all know that nowadays, football is not played anymore in the stadiums. It's played in many different, scenarios. You can monetize all of those. And there are many things that you can monetize in a good way for the benefit of the club. That's something where we want to help. And this is why, we're putting together a toolkit to try to explain that in kind of, plain words, but really expressing, the potential of that and how to do it.
I couldn't agree more. And in fact, I was thinking again, back to Football Innovation Forum, there was a conversation with La Liga. And basically what they were saying is, and they published reports with Nielsen on this, saying it's not that people are not consuming sports content. It's just that they're doing it differently. Absolutely. Maybe the live content piece is decreasing, but the overall sports content consumption is increasing because now you have so many options. You have games, you have video games, you have documentaries. So all of that news, I mean, it's all over the place now. And then there was also a couple of things that were interesting in what you just said there. At the end of the day, you need, if you can call it this way, a generalist that knows IP, meaning that is able to understand all the angles of the business. And finally, if you allow me the expression, but you blew my mind with those, protecting a game in the moon. Actually, my thought went back to my childhood. And I was thinking, actually, Space Jam, the movie, is going to become a reality. So I mean, that's just amazing. So I mean, at the end of the day, what the underlying conclusion here is that the landscape is pretty, it's changing dramatically. So I want to ask you, how does the International Trademark Association help? How can they help football brands understand this new playing field? Well,
as we said, I think, we're putting together a toolkit that we will make available to all the participants in World Football Summit. We will be there with a panel. We will be happy to try to answer possible questions. And I think the best way for football clubs to understand the potential is to join an association such as INTA, to start getting educated, thinking about, hiring a professional that will support that. Because as I said before, it's absolutely, the potential is absolutely huge. And of course, Jaime, we always think about projecting ourselves into the future. But you mentioned it as well, as fans, we need to think about the potential of the past and the rights into the past. I'll give you an example. You mentioned documentaries. I love to watch documentaries on, I'm going to say one name, Netflix, about, football. I'm a fan of Real Sociedad. I would love to purchase the game where Real Sociedad won the first Liga against Sporting Gijón. I would love to buy, a shirt from Real Sociedad from that time. And look how the logo of Real Sociedad has been evolving over years. There is merchandising behind it. All that is marketing, it's business, but it's legal. And it's legal IP. Looking into the past and projecting ourselves into the future.
I did want to ask you, are there any other either resources that you recommend the industry leaders to check out, or even if you have an example.
Yeah, we have, for example,
other...
when that's a great question. So on our website, I think it's accessible only to members, but we do perform, market studies, research studies to understand how consumers interact with the brands. So we have a research piece on how Gen Zers and millennials are perceiving brands and counterfeited products. That's an extremely relevant piece of information for football clubs to start thinking, what their strategy should be. Plus, as a kind of not-for-profit, committee-driven, we organize, small sectorial encounters to talk about, legal IP matters. So this is where, the IP councils from the different clubs could meet together, talk about their common problems. And what we also do, we do a lot of lobbying. We're an advocacy organization. So we approach the authorities in the US, in the European Union, Latin America, Asia Pacific, and we talk about copyright protection. We talk about trademark protection. We talk about enforcement. We talk about fighting counterfeiting and piracy. So I think there is real value into that. So it's a kind of educational content, but it's also, the studies and the advocacy work that we do.
We definitely recommend anybody listening to this conversation to actually go check that out, because I don't want to go into the rabbit hole of Gen Z because that's another hot topic, but we will link to that on the show notes of the conversation. And I guess I just want to shift to a final few questions from my side. And one of the things that, you guys are also at INTA, you're experts in organizing in-person events, no? So you had your annual meeting back in April, May. So what were the main conclusions that you drew from that event?
Well, it was the first in-person event kind of, post-pandemic and still, within the pandemic. So we got around 7,000 attendees in total. Normally we would get 12,000. What was nice was that sense of community coming back together and remaining very positive and very optimistic on the value of intellectual property. We're working a lot on, commercialization of IP, so monetization of IP. We're working a lot as well on ESG, CSR, which is another area that is interesting for football clubs to consider. We're also working a lot on DEI, on women leadership initiatives. So we need to talk about women's football. All these are, very relevant topics. So it was a great experience indeed. And next year will be May 16th to 20th, 2023 will be in Singapore, because we want to be closer to our, Asian members.
Nice. And it's actually nice to see that you're mentioning, and to get that external perspective, you're mentioning some of the topics that we believe at World Football Summit that are also important, no? So sustainability, women's leadership, for sure. So that's nice to hear from an external party. And I guess the annual meeting is one of the landmark events. It's a historic event, to be honest. So I want to understand from you, I think it's more relevant to ask you than pretty much anybody else. What do you believe the value of in-person events?
Well, I think, it's the value of in-person events is networking. And but it's not networking just from a professional perspective. Even more important, it's from a personal perspective. At INTA, we like to define ourselves as a kind of big family, and that's the truth. We work extremely hard, we party extremely hard as well, and it's definitely worth it. And we have members who have been at INTA annual meetings for 20, 30, 40 years. And they come systematically. I think, of course, this kind of technology is very helpful. There's no doubt about it. But there is nothing that replaces, in-person contact. And that's something that needs to be kept. And this is why, I'm thrilled to be able to attend World Football Summit this year. And I really, applaud the work that you're doing in your industry, because that's extremely relevant.
I appreciate the kind words. And I just want to finish with this last, let's say, question. What are your expectations for World Football Summit?
Well, as it's going to be the first time that I will be attending together with some members of INTA, first we want to interact with everyone. We want to network. We want to learn because there is always, a learning opportunity. There's no doubt about that. And then if we're able to convince a few of the attendees to pay a little more attention to IP and to bring that back to their football clubs and start, developing the structure within the clubs so as to have an IP person, we will be thrilled. That's our goal.
I couldn't have said it better myself. I think that's something, that thing. I think IP is something that's going to be a source of competitive advantage for football clubs. So it's definitely something that they need to look into if they haven't done so already. And as you said, not the top tier football clubs, but also the bottom ones. So fantastic. Well, thank you for that. And before we finish this, for me, this was a great conversation, Etienne. I really thank you for that. It was a true masterclass because I'm not expert on the matter and it helped me clarify. But you mentioned you were a Real Sociedad fan. And sometimes, when I see I have guests that are football fans, I like to ask them this question, which is, assuming you have unlimited budget and you could acquire any player in history for Real Sociedad, who would that be?
You know what? First, I would like to secure somebody like Mikel Oyarzabal. I think he encompasses the values of the club, because sometimes, club values are far more important than any player you might be able to bring. And of course, when it comes to Real Sociedad, it's La Cantera, it's La Concha, and that has no price. And you should always keep that. So that would be my major investment.
Well, thank you for that, because that's actually one of the most unique answers I got to that question. Usually people go to the big names in history. So I really appreciate that answer. And I couldn't agree more with you. So Etienne, thank you so much. I don't know if there's anything else you want to cover, or if you want this.
No, the only thing, we will be thrilled to be at World Football Summit. And if any of the attendees recognizes, any representative from INTA, feel free to, stop us, ask us any questions, because we're here to really support you and make sure that, you develop the right IP strategy within your clubs. That's the most important thing.
Thank you so much, Etienne. So have a great rest of your day.
Thank you, Jaime.
And there you have him, Etienne Sanz de Acedo, CEO at the International Trademark Association. I hope you enjoyed this conversation and learned a lot about the future of intellectual property in the football industry. Once again, feel free to reach out across social media and let us know your feedback. Nothing else from my side. We look forward to seeing you in the upcoming WFS Europe and on the next episode of the World Football Summit podcast. Until next time, have a great rest of your day.